insist that Jack Sullivan introduce me.
Ladies and gentlemen.
South Lake Tahoe.
John Galten.
I knew I would get little. I would like to, Jack said I was going to pay for this. He said he was going to introduce Mary Beth Bonacci after me, the Sapporo queen, who supplied beer for the Institute for 3 years until she got religion. I really thought that what would precede me were all of the wits. Evidently that's not so. There was a kind of a serious note. I thought I would speak last because I would be perhaps a bit more serious than everything else, but it looks like the evening is going to kind of just dribble into the ground here with me. I am not tempted to deliver a roast to Ray Dennehy or to be excessively witty, which I do not have the wherewithal to do. My friendship with Ray goes back too far, and my respect and esteem for him is too deep to give him any kind of a roast. So what I would like to do, because I am 73 years old, Festio is slightly older than myself, is to just give a kind of an appreciation of my friendship and my admiration for Ray Dennehy. I cannot and I will not roast him, although I do so in private conversation with him, because he claims that the only person he pays to talk behind his back is his proctologist. Sorry, Dr. Pekka. Dr. Pekka is the carrier of many tales behind people's backs. I met Ray Dennehy a long time ago when I was an undergraduate. He is as older than myself, as is quite obvious. Ray, I want to talk a little bit about him because all that he is and all that he delivered as a professor is a product of everything, his upbringing, the time of his history and everything else. And I want to talk about that because the extraordinary gift that he is has a history, and it's worth your while, you young whippersnappers, to know where all this came from. And I think that's a good thing, altogether a good thing, because what old men are supposed to do is to tell you stories. Pay attention. Ray came from, like many of us, came from a working class Irish family in the Mission District. His father had been in Ireland and had been a member of the IRA and was forced to leave Ireland because there was a price on his head. And so it was expeditious for him to immigrate to America rather than being hung or shot by a firing squad. Mother and father were working class Irish in the Mission District. And in those days, the Mission District was a wonderful, teeming, family-oriented place. Kids everywhere. It was a tough time, an honest, fair, just, but tough time. You either learned how to fight well or run fast. And it was helpful to have both talents at the same time. Ray characteristically grew up in that kind of atmosphere and frequented Gold's Gym to learn how to box, to learn how to run, and to lift weights for either running or fighting. And this was to have, I think, a profound effect on his personality and the rest of his life. Ray, like many of us, was second and third generation immigrant. And he, after primary school, Catholic proper primary school, Catholic school, went to Sacred Heart High School, which at that time, and probably still is, the place where tougher kids went to school, who required a firmer hand and stronger discipline than the gentleman who went to St. Ignatius High School. Or Bellarmine High School in the case of Father Fessio. Ray graduated from there and then, interestingly, went into the United States Navy and was in there for 4 years and served on a cruiser and was deeply influenced by some officers who began speaking about subjects which he as a mission kid had never heard about, and kind of inspired him to the intellectual life. A very strange place to learn about the intellectual life in the combat center of a United States cruiser. He came to USF, which is where I met him, and many of us there were of the same ilk. Second, third generation immigrant kids, working class kids. This was not, as a Jesuit president in the future would say, USF was not the Harvard of the West. But it was a good school who still had intact the residue of the great Ratio Studiorum, the Jesuit plan of studies. And even though it needed improvement nonetheless, the wisdom of the ages was passed on to us. And I suppose we all felt, and Ray must have felt this as well as I did, that we were in some way second class. But that does not mean that we would cede immediately to those who considered themselves first class their position. We felt as if they'd have to fight for it. And a fight we gave them. I remember playing at center at USF, and there was a 6'10" sophomore center for University of Berkeley, and there were many Catholic innuendos in those days, and they were cheering and making many anti-Catholic cheers. And I turned to the center next to me, UC Berkeley, and I said to him, "You hear what they're saying?" I said, "You're going to pay for every one of those words. I'm going to tattoo your ribs with my elbows. You may win, but you will be sore for a week." And I would say that's the experience that Ray Dennehy and I had at USF, and maybe Father Fessio as well at Santa Clara, which was, of course, was at those days and still is Brand X. I was very impressed with the class that was ahead of me at USF. It was Ray Dennehy's ilk, Kevin Starr, an extremely bright class. And I was deeply inspired by them because, we were kids from local high schools and this and that, and who were we? And all of a sudden these guys displayed intellectual interest and knowledge and enthusiasm and everything else, and I thought, oh my gosh, there is a world beyond basketball that I have to discover. And Ray Dennehy was one of the people who infected me with that idea. After, and you may remember, if you don't remember, you probably don't remember. I keep forgetting how young you all are. Just before Ray Dennehy and my class got to USF, there was a rather wonderful and extraordinary Catholic intellectual renaissance. Writers, philosophers, etc., etc., etc. And we were still infected by that. Now, if you go to the bookstore at USF now, you won't find the kind of books I'm describing. There was Maritain and Gilson and all kinds of things like that, because the students were reading that. And that was the atmosphere that we grew up in. There was this tremendous intellectual ferment and excitement and everything else. Father Fessio talked about his great teacher in practical ethics. And that was the infection of the atmosphere at the same time. Well, of course, the collapse came after 1965. But Ray Dennehy was part of that class, and then he went on after that to University of California, Berkeley, with his philosophical degree, and had to debate the logical positivists, being a scholastic Thomist philosopher. And there's where he began, I think, to appreciate that there had been a fundamental shift in the intellectual basis of American life and culture. And he began to see that the sureness and the steadiness and the calmness and the serenity of the metaphysical and ontological view of the Middle Ages, which was correct and true, was no longer the paradigm for all of civilization. And now it was going to be unmitigated, unquestioning, no quarter, intellectual war. And he was up for that, and he learned there. And then he went to Toronto and got his PhD. And there, I think, although I'm not privy to his own studies there, he really learned about the practical, while not neglecting the abstract, the metaphysical, the ontological. He became very interested in the political, the practical, and the social philosophy. He began studying the philosophy of the person, particularly under Maritain and Gilson, and Maritain's great protege, Yves Simon. And Ray began to see that the issue was not just metaphysics that underlay everything, but the real issue was the issue of the human person. What is the human person? What is the common man? What is the definition of what it means to be a person? And I think fired by that, Ray Dennehy, with his background in Gold's Gym and fighting and boxing and weightlifting and everything else, Ray was ideally fitted in his own time to promote the scholastic Thomistic tradition of the value and the dignity of the human person, which is currently under attack and which is a left-handed strike against the incarnation of the second person of the Blessed Trinity. Ray Dennehy taught and had to fight his way through a number of small teaching jobs at West Valley College, adjunct professor at Santa Clara, where Father Fessio knew him, and then coming to USF in the evening college as administrator, and then became a full-time professor at USF. But his work was not limited to the classroom. Ray was a fighter. Ray was a battler. Ray was someone who sallied forth from the safety walls of the castle and took on those who would disagree with the truest values of human dignity. And wherever there was an issue, wherever he was invited, from Hastings Law School to the University of California, Berkeley, to a radio program, Ray presented himself as the champion of truth.